The knock came so late I thought I imagined it. I was in the shed behind the cottage, one hand black with grease, the other holding a wrench I'd already dropped twice because my fingers were numb. It had been raining since dark, that cold Seattle rain that gets through your jacket slow and mean. The truck's hood was up, the radio on low, and I was doing what I usually did when the day was over and the house felt too quiet. Working, keeping my hands busy so my head didn't start wandering. I was 23, and my life already ran like an old man's. Up before light, landscaping jobs all over the edge of the city. Mud, hedges, stone borders, rotten fences, whatever paid. Back home after dark to a cottage that had belonged to my grandparents, then my parents for a blink, then just me. The place leaned a little to the left, the roof complained in hard rain, and the back porch boards had two spots you learned not to trust. But it was mine, even if half the time it felt more like I was guarding it for the dead. The knock came again. Not the front door, the back. I stepped out of the shed, crossed the wet yard, and saw her through the porch light. She stood there soaked through, one hand wrapped around her own elbow, hair stuck to her face, breathing like she'd been walking fast in the cold. Even like that, she looked expensive. Not flashy. Just the kind of woman who made the whole broken doorway look rougher around her. Long coat dark with rain, boots too clean for my road, posture still straight even though everything else about her said she was near the end of herself. "Sorry," she said before I could speak. Her voice was low and controlled, like she was used to never needing to repeat herself. "My car died about a mile back. I saw your light." I looked past her into the trees and road, then back at her. She wasn't drunk, wasn't playing scared. She looked like somebody who had kept it together for a very long time and had finally hit the wall. "You can come in," I said. That was it. No big decision. Just cold rain, a stranger at my door, and me stepping aside. Inside, the cottage smelled like damp wood, old coffee, and the heater fighting for its life. I handed her a towel and pointed her toward the bathroom so she could dry off. My grandmother's old robe was hanging behind the door, faded blue, too short for her probably, but clean. When she came out wearing it, holding her wet clothes like she wasn't sure where to put them, something about the whole picture hit me hard. This woman looked like she belonged in some glass house above the water, not standing barefoot on my cracked kitchen floor. "I'm sorry," she said again. "You already said that." That got the smallest smile out of her. I put water on for tea because that was what my grandma used to do for every problem, big or small. While it heated, I found extra blankets and laid them on the couch. "You don't have to do that," she said. "It's either that or the bed, and I don't know you that well." This time she almost laughed. A real one, short and surprised, like she hadn't expected it from herself. We sat at the kitchen table with tea neither of us really wanted. Rain hit the windows. The heater clicked and rattled. Up close, I could see she was older than I first thought. Early 40s, maybe. Beautiful, yeah, but not in a soft way. More like she'd spent years holding herself together in rooms where weakness got noticed. "My name is Diana," she said. I told her mine. She looked around the kitchen, at the chipped cabinets, the tools on the counter, the patched ceiling. "You live here alone?" "Have for a while." She nodded like that answer meant more than I said. I didn't ask much, but maybe that was why she started talking. Not all at once. A little, then more. Car stalled after an argument. She had kept driving farther than she meant to. Then she just stopped caring where the road went. Her husband had money, influence, schedules, drivers, assistants, houses that were always perfect. The kind of life where nothing looked wrong from the outside. She said they'd been married 22 years, and by the time she realized how small she'd become inside it, she no longer knew how to leave. "He never had to yell much," she said, staring into her cup. "He just decided what was true. After enough years, you start repeating it to yourself." I didn't give her some speech about strength or starting over. I just sat there and listened. That seemed to matter more. She told me they had a son. Grown now. Close to my age. She said that part carefully, like she still measured every sentence before letting it out. She said she had stayed longer than she should have because she wanted her son to get through that house without carrying all of it with him. By the time the sky started turning gray, neither of us had slept much. I made eggs, toast, and bad coffee. She stayed at the table in that blue robe, hair loose now, one hand around the mug. Morning light made the cottage look even rougher, but she didn't seem to mind. She kept glancing around like she was trying to understand why being there felt easier than going back. When she finally stood to leave, I walked her to the door. The rain had slowed to a mist. "My husband's driver will find me soon," she said. I nodded. She looked at me for a second too long. This is the first place I've been in years where I could hear myself think. Then she left. I watched her walk down the path in borrowed boots, toward a life that probably had gates, cameras, polished stone, and too many locked doors. By the time she disappeared past the trees, the cottage felt different. Same bad roof, same cold kitchen, same truck waiting in the shed. She came back 3 days later like she was trying to prove to herself she wouldn't. I was under the truck again, lying on cold concrete with a flashlight between my teeth, when I heard tires on the gravel. Not the heavy sound of a delivery van or one of my clients getting lost. Something smoother, more careful. I rolled out, wiped my hands on a rag, and there she was, standing near the fence in a dark coat with her arms folded tight across herself like she'd already had the argument in her head the whole drive over. "I brought food," she said, lifting one paper bag a little. That was how it started. She stayed an hour that day, then half a Saturday the next week. Then one evening turned into dinner, and dinner turned into her sitting at my kitchen table with her shoes off, watching me try not to burn onions in a pan that had seen better decades. She never arrived dramatic. No tears, no speeches. Just tired at first, then quieter, then easier. Like each time she crossed my yard, something inside her unclenched before she even reached the porch. I learned her habits without trying. She touched the edge of a cup when she was thinking. She liked opening the back door even when it was cold, just to let the air in. She noticed everything. The crack in the hallway wall, the old coffee tin where I kept bolts, the way I automatically checked the roof bucket when it rained hard. One afternoon I showed her the shed because she asked what I was always doing out there. I expected the polite look rich people gave when they were trying not to be rude. Instead, she stood in the doorway like it was something worth studying. The truck with its faded paint, the shelves of parts. My grandfather's tools hung in rows that only made sense to me. "You're building this back from almost nothing," she said. "Trying to." She ran her fingers across the workbench, over the nicks and stains. "No, you are." That got under my skin in a way I didn't expect. Most people saw the place and thought unfinished, worn out, behind. She looked at it like it was proof of life. A week later she brought a camera. Not for me. For the cottage. For the yard. For the rainwater gathered on the rusted barrel. For the porch light glowing against wet cedar. She walked around the property in boots that cost more than my monthly electric bill, squatting in the mud to catch the angle of the shed roof against the trees. When she came inside, cheeks cold and eyes brighter than I'd seen them, she spread the shots across my table on her screen. I stared at them. My house looked real. Not broken. Not embarrassing. Weathered, yes, but alive. Like it had character instead of damage. "You see ruins," she said. "I see texture." That night she stayed late enough that leaving started to feel stupid. Rain hammered the windows. Her driver kept calling, then stopped. She muted her phone and set it face down. "Does he know where you are?" I asked. "He knows I'm not where I'm supposed to be." She leaned back in the chair, exhausted. For him, that's worse. It was the first time she said more about the husband without me pulling it out of her. His name was Grant. He owned companies, buildings, half the air in certain rooms. Men like him didn't throw fits in public. They made calls. They smiled while they moved pieces around. He had spent years deciding what she wore to events, which friends were useful, which hobbies were respectable, how her work should be presented, which parts of her counted and which were inconvenient. "I used to think control had to look obvious," she said. "It doesn't. Sometimes it looks polished." Sometimes it looks like someone improving your life until there's nothing left in it that feels like yours. She started coming for whole weekends after that. We fell into routines too quickly to pretend it was nothing. She cooked better than I did but liked watching me try. I fixed cabinet hinges while she sorted through boxes of old dishes my grandmother had kept wrapped in newspaper. We drank coffee on the porch in jackets, talking about everything and then suddenly nothing. That silence with her never felt empty, felt earned. And somewhere inside all that ordinary time, the line moved. It happened in the kitchen, of all places. I was washing plates. She was standing close enough behind me that I could feel her warmth before I turned. When I did, she looked at me in this direct, tired, honest way that made pretending impossible. "I don't feel like someone's wife when I'm here," she said quietly. "I feel like myself." Then she kissed me. There was nothing careful about what came after that. Not rushed, not dumb, just overdue in a way that made both of us still for a second after. Her hand stayed at the side of my neck. Mine was still wet from the sink. We looked at each other like we had both crossed something we already knew was there. After that, the cottage changed. So did I. I started finishing things. The truck, the porch rail, the broken shelf in the pantry. She moved through the rooms like she belonged there, and instead of panicking me, it made the place feel less haunted, more chosen. Then the phone calls changed. At first Grant called her again and again. Then from other numbers. Then messages cold and precise. "Come home. Stop this performance. Name your terms. We can solve this privately." One night she listened to a voicemail in my yard with her face gone hard and pale. "He knows there's someone," she said. A few days later, a black SUV idled too long at the end of my road. That same week, Diana told me she'd been offered a small gallery slot for her photography. Work she'd hidden, delayed, apologized for. We spent 2 nights choosing prints at my kitchen table while her old life pressed closer from every direction. Then she left the mansion for good. Not in some big scene. She packed cases, called a lawyer, and came to my cottage with more boxes than the place knew what to do with. She stood in the middle of my living room, looked around at the stacked bags, the low ceiling, the lamp with the crooked shade, and let out one shaking breath. "I told him I want a divorce," she said. And just like that, the refuge became the life. The war didn't start with shouting. It started with paper. Overnight, my kitchen table turned into a legal station. Neat stacks of envelopes, printouts with firm names in the corner. Diana's reading glasses beside a cold mug of coffee. Every day brought some new version of the same message. Return quietly, sign carefully, disappear gracefully. Grant didn't need to come to the cottage and make a scene. He had people for that. People in suits, people on phones, people who knew how to make a threat sound like a reasonable option. Diana's lawyer came out one afternoon and sat at my table like she was entering a field hospital. She was sharp, calm, and tired in the way competent people get when they know exactly how ugly something is about to become. She read through the first settlement draft, then slid it across to Diana without any drama. "He wants control more than he wants resolution," she said. "Money is the bait. The conditions are the trap." The offer looked huge to me, bigger than anything I had ever imagined touching. But the deeper she got into it, the uglier it became. Restrictions on what Diana could say, limits on public interviews, quiet expectations around her work, her name, her access to certain circles. It was basically a polished version of the same marriage she was trying to leave. Diana didn't even blink. No, that was the first moment I understood she wasn't just escaping. She was fighting. Then came the investigators. A sedan parked half a block down for 2 mornings in a row. A guy pretending to check his phone while facing my property too long. Photos taken when we drove into the city for meetings. One online item hinting that a prominent businessman's wife had become emotionally unstable and was being influenced by a younger laborer with unclear motives. That one almost made me laugh, except Diana read it standing at the sink and went completely still. I took the phone from her hand and set it down. "You don't have to read that garbage." "I know," she said, "but I need to know how he's building it." That was the thing about her. She could be exhausted, angry, shaken, and still exact. Still smart. Still paying attention. She moved more boxes into the cottage that week. Clothes, books, framed prints, old sketchbooks, a lamp she said she'd loved for 15 years but had never been allowed to put anywhere Grant would see it. Every object she carried through my front door changed the place. Not into something fancier, into something shared. Her coat by my door. Her shampoo in my bathroom. Her photographs leaning against my wall while we figured out which ones would go into the exhibition. At the same time, the house itself started changing under our hands. I fixed the porch steps. She picked paint samples for the hallway. I repaired the sagging shed door while she stood nearby reading legal notes out loud so she could hear how ridiculous some of the language sounded. At night, when depositions and rumors and calls had scraped her raw, we would end up in the kitchen making pasta at 10:30 like normal people. That normal life became our stubborn little act of defiance. Then her son showed up. I was outside splitting wet cedar when I saw a clean dark car come up the drive. Diana froze on the porch before he even stepped out. He was about my age, maybe a year older, expensive coat, tired eyes, his father's posture but none of his coldness. For one bad second I thought this was where everything blew apart. Instead he looked at the cottage, then at me, then at his mother. "So this is where you disappeared to," he said. Diana went pale. "Caleb." He cut her off but not cruelly. "Mom, I'm not here to drag you back." The three of us sat in the living room, knees almost touching because there wasn't enough space not to. He said he'd known for years that his father controlled every room he entered. Not always loudly, just completely. He said the divorce still hurt, the public mess still embarrassed him, and seeing her with someone my age had taken him a minute. But none of that changed the basic fact that she looked more like herself sitting in my crooked cottage than she ever had in that giant house. Then he looked at me. "If this is real," he said, "don't let her carry the whole thing alone." That landed harder than any threat. After that, he became a quiet bridge. He corrected lies when they reached him. Refused to play messenger for Grant. Showed up at the gallery while we were hanging Diana's exhibition and spent 6 straight hours lifting frames, adjusting lights, and pretending not to notice when his mother got emotional over seeing her own name on the wall without her husband's attached to it. The opening mattered. Not because it solved anything, but because it put her back into public as herself. People came. Some out of loyalty, some out of curiosity, some because scandal draws a crowd. Diana stood in a dark dress between her photographs of rain, wood, rust, windows, and light, and for the first time since I'd met her, she looked fully visible. Grant answered 2 days later with a new offer and a new insult. More money, more pressure, and a clause meant to bury her completely. This time the lawyer didn't even sugarcoat it. "He thinks he can make freedom look expensive enough that you'll sell your voice." Diana read the pages once, set them down, and pushed them away. "No more private surrender," she said. "If he wants a fight in daylight, he can have one." That night we sat on the back porch under work lights because the fixture overhead had blown again. The yard smelled like wet dirt and cedar. My hand was wrapped around hers so tight it almost hurt. She leaned against my shoulder and said, very quietly, "I'm done disappearing." And that was the real line in the sand. Not the move. Not the headlines. Not even the divorce filing. The choice. Not to go quietly. Not to be edited down into something easier to manage. Not anymore. After Diana said she was done disappearing, everything got louder for a while. Not in our house. In the world outside it. The next month felt like living with weather you couldn't shut out. Her lawyer kept calling with updates that were never small. Grant pushed harder because that was what men like him did when the old methods stopped working. More pressure. More polished warnings. More people reaching out like they were concerned friends when really they were just carrying his version of the story into every room before Diana could enter it herself. But something had changed in her by then, and I could see it in the way she moved. She stopped reading every message twice. Stopped asking whether she was overreacting. Stopped sounding surprised that he would try one more trick. She still had bad nights. Nights where she sat at the kitchen table in my old sweatshirt, staring at papers until her coffee went cold. Nights where she woke up tense and silent and stood at the sink looking out into the yard like she was bracing for impact. But she didn't bend the way she had in the beginning. The fear was still there. It just wasn't steering anymore. Caleb helped more than either of us expected. He didn't become some cheerful mascot for the new life. It stayed complicated, which made it real. Some days he came by and was easy with us, helping me frame out a new section of shelving in the shed or carrying lumber to the porch like he'd always done it. Other days he was quieter, sharper around the edges, still sorting out what it meant to watch his family break and then rebuild in a shape nobody had planned. But he never went back to his father's line. That mattered. When Grant's team tried leaning on him, he didn't fold. When a story started making Diana sound reckless and confused, Caleb gave a statement through her lawyer that shut down half the whispering in one day. Nothing dramatic, just clear. He said his mother was acting by choice, that nobody had pushed her into leaving, and that anyone pretending otherwise didn't know what they were talking about. That one move did more damage to Grant's neat little narrative than all the expensive strategy around it. By then, the exhibition had opened properly and kept drawing people. Not crowds out the door, not some miracle overnight reinvention, but enough. Enough to matter. Enough for a second showing. Enough for local press to talk about Diana like an artist instead of an accessory. Enough that people started standing in front of her photographs and seeing exactly what I'd seen on my kitchen table the first time she showed me the cottage through her lens. Weathered things. Honest things. Places that had held on. I watched her at the gallery one evening from across the room while she explained one of the prints to a woman in a gray coat. She was calm, grounded, fully in her own skin. No checking over her shoulder. No shrinking her voice to fit some other person's mood. I had one of those strange moments where the room went quiet in my head and I realized I wasn't just in love with her. I was watching her return to herself in real time. The legal end came almost the way the beginning had. Not with a huge speech. With a document. Her lawyer drove out in the rain again. Came into our kitchen again. Laid papers on the same scarred table where we'd read every bad offer before. But this time her face was different. Careful still but not grim. "He's done testing whether you'll break," she said. The terms were finally real. Enough money for Diana to stand on without ever needing to ask permission again. Full separation. Real autonomy. Fewer strings, fewer hidden traps. There were still limits because men like Grant never walked away without trying to preserve some version of their own reflection, but it was no longer a disguised cage. It was an exit. Diana read every page. Once, then again. I stayed quiet. It wasn't my decision, and she knew that. My job was to be there, the same way I'd been there through all of it. Across the table. Coffee going cold. My hand close enough if she wanted it. Finally she looked up. "I'm not signing because he won," she said. Her lawyer nodded. "I know. I'm signing because I'm finished giving him years." That was it. Not surrender. Not a retreat. A closing door. After that, life didn't suddenly become simple. It became possible. That was better. For the first couple weeks, Diana slept harder than I'd ever seen. Like her body had only just gotten permission. Then she got restless in a healthier way. She started planning. Not fantasy planning. Real planning. Budget numbers on yellow pads. Contractor calls. Gallery rental options. Insurance conversations. She invested money into the cottage like she meant every nail of it. New roof first. Then windows that actually shut right. Then the porch, rebuilt solid enough that you could walk across it without knowing which boards were lying to you. I used my part of the momentum differently, but for the first time in years, I used it at all. I finished the truck. Not halfway. Not good enough for now. Finished it. Sanded, primed, tuned, rewired, sealed. Then I expanded the shed into a real workshop. Nothing flashy. Just honest space. Better lighting. Proper storage. Room for 2 projects at once. The kind of place I'd wanted since I was 17 but had trained myself not to want too loudly. Diana never treated any of it like she was saving me. That would have ruined it. She treated it like building. Shared building. My hands, her eye, both of our money, both of our choices. She turned the front room of the cottage into a small studio corner where she could work on prints and layouts. I turned the old side lean-to into a proper finishing bay. The house stopped feeling like the last surviving piece of a dead family and started feeling like the first thing either of us had chosen on purpose. Caleb became part of the rhythm too. Sunday dinners sometimes. Random drop-ins. Helping with a delivery. Standing with his coffee on the new porch rail. Watching me and Diana argue about paint colors like it was the most normal thing in the world. He never forced the new shape of us into easy language, and I respected him for that. But one evening, after we'd all eaten too much and Diana was inside rinsing plates, he stayed back with me on the porch. "She laughs different here," he said. He was right. Sometimes we just need a different place to breathe. Have you ever found a person who finally made you feel at home? Tell me in the comments. I looked at him. Yeah. He nodded once. Good. That meant more than I let show. Now, when I stand in the yard at dusk, the whole place feels different from the night she first knocked on my door. The cottage is still the cottage. Same bones. Same trees. Same damp edge of Seattle where the air smells like cedar and rain most of the year. But the porch is straight. The roof holds. Light spills warm from the front windows. Her photographs hang inside beside old family pictures. My workshop hums out back with real work in it. The truck runs. The garden beds are clean. The gate doesn't drag anymore. And when Diana steps outside and leans against the rail, looking out over the yard like she belongs to her own life, I still feel that first strange jolt from the night I opened the door. Love didn't come